Nutty Putty Cave, located just west of Utah Lake in Utah, is a gnarly hydrothermal cave that's got a reputation for being super dangerous. With its crazy, disorienting paths and tight squeezes, it's an abyss that plunges 145 feet deep and 1,355 feet long, basically a nightmare for anyone who's claustrophobic. Back in 2006, the cave had to be shut down because too many people were getting stuck inside. Even though there were no fatal accidents, it was enough to close off to its 5,000 daily visitors. Fast forward 3 years, and they reopened it, not knowing something way more sinister was about to go down. You're watching Into the Mist, and this is the first-hand account of John Edward Jones, the man who never made it out of Nutty Putty Cave. I was raised in a sprawling family of 7 kids, where my brother Josh and I were thrown into the world of spelunking, aka cave exploring, by our dad. The thrill of adventure was in our blood. Our childhood was a blur of endless hours spent delving into caves scattered across the expanse of Utah. We were completely captivated by the adrenaline rush of navigating those murky, subterranean passages. By the time I was 26, I was married, with a 1-year-old daughter, and my wife was expecting our second child. We were living in Virginia, where I was in medical school studying to become a pediatric cardiologist. Everything was bright and sunny, until Thanksgiving rolled around. Being far away from my family and friends for long, I decided to head back home to Utah to spend the holiday with them. And when the clan gathered, the wanderlust within us kicked in. As a youngster, I used to explore caves almost every few weeks, but life's hustle soon took over. Medical school was a huge commitment, and it had been years since I'd gone into a cave. So during this big family reunion, since my life was going exactly as I'd hoped, I decided to revive my childhood hobby. That being said, my brother and I were determined to pull off a comeback that would live on in our memories forever. We decided to venture into one of the wildest and most notorious cave spots around, the Nutty Putty. Just a few months back, we heard that this famous cave was reopened to the public. At its prime, Nutty Putty used to draw in a whopping 5,000 visitors a day. It had a reputation for its tight, slippery tunnels that were a real squeeze to get through. The cave was formed by hydrothermal vents carving their way through limestone, and it got its name from the clay-like brown substance lining its walls. Each part of Nutty Putty had a name that matches its size, like the birth canal, the aorta, the maze, and the scout eater. But in 2006, the cave was shut down after a string of incidents where amateur cavers or scouts got stuck inside. 2 of those incidents involved Boy Scouts who nearly died in separate instances within a week of each other. In one case, it took rescue crews 14 hours to free a 16-year-old scout from the cave using a complex system of pulleys, which ultimately led to the cave being temporarily closed. So when we heard it was opening again, we knew it was our chance to explore this cave, and what could be more memorable than Nutty Putty to resume our favorite pastime. On November 24th, 2009, at the crack of dawn, I joined 10 other friends and family members as we squeezed through the tight opening of Nutty Putty Cave. Entering Nutty Putty Cave, we first explored the largest room, the big slide, but our sights were set on a more challenging section we'd heard about, the birth canal. Rumor has it that this narrow squeeze would drop down, getting even tighter as you go along, until finally opening up into a bigger space, making you feel like you're being born again as you come out. It sounded thrilling. We split into 2 groups while I went solo to find the canal. Few minutes into the squeeze that led to it, I found a hole in the wall that looked strikingly similar to the description of the birth canal's gateway. I bought into my gut feeling and decided to go in head first. As I was crawling on my belly, I felt a roller coaster of emotions with butterflies in my stomach. I kept hoping the squeeze would open up and lead me to the birth canal, but instead, it just kept getting tighter. I was hitting a brick wall, but the strangest thing was that I didn't have a clue. Despite the tight squeeze, my excitement kept me going, turning it into an adventurous challenge rather than a scary situation. I couldn't help but imagine how proud my people would be when I'd tell them about pushing through this claustrophobic squeeze to find the birth canal, but I was mistaken. I crawled for quite some time, but the squeeze never seemed to open up. It was hard to know exactly where I was as the squeeze was completely dark, and with every inch I moved, I lost my sense of direction. It's likely that I did enter the birth canal at some point, but somewhere along the line, veered off and ended up in a whole different section, the scout eater. That passage wasn't meant for exploring. It was just too small for anyone to navigate. I eventually reached a sharp, almost vertical downturn. Maybe this was the spot I was expecting in the birth canal? Excitement gripped me once again. I carefully made my way down, the tunnel getting tighter, barely measuring 10 inches by 18 inches. As I wriggled forward, a sinking feeling started to worm its way into my gut, but it was completely overshadowed by my bubbling anticipation. I kept pushing forward, fingers crossed that this tight squeeze would eventually open up into something bigger. But then my bubble burst by the cold, hard truth. As I cast my eyes upon the scene, I realized there was no open room, just a dead end. The narrow squeeze led me to a point of no return. I was stuck upside down, But considering myself an expert, I couldn't lose hope. I tried to conquer my fear and push myself back out, but all of a sudden, I lost my grip and I fell into the hole, passing out. When I regained consciousness, my brother was there. It was a huge relief, and I regained hope. Josh tried pulling me up by my legs, and after some struggle, he made progress. But then I slipped from his grasp too and slid back into the crevice. This time, I was wedged in even tighter, with one hand pinned under my body and the other forced backward. All that stuck out of the crevice were my feet and ankles. Realizing how serious things were, Josh and I said a quick prayer. Then, Josh dashed out of the cave to get help. The first rescuer to arrive was a woman named Susie Motola. By the time she got to me, I had been trapped for 3 hours, 400 feet into the cave and 100 feet underground. Susie introduced herself to my black running shoes, which were the only thing visible in the tunnel. I responded by saying, "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming, but I really want to get out of here." Over the next few hours, scores of rescuers arrived and put their noses to the grindstone to set me free from the cave. They came up with various ideas and even discussed greasing the cave walls to make it easier for me to escape. Ultimately, they decided to go in with an assortment of climbing cams. They fed a rope through the cams, attached it to my legs, and then pulled on the other end to lift me out. While they attached the cams, they also started drilling away at the rock to widen the tunnel. The drilling was slow because the passages were so narrow it took over an hour to chip away just a couple of inches of rock. Another complication was my position. The ceiling above me was so low that they couldn't just pull me straight up. They had to lift me a little, then readjust and repeat the process until I was free. The first attempt using just the climbing cams didn't work, so rescuers decided to feed the rope through pulleys bolted to the walls of the cave instead. Again, it was painfully slow because of how narrow the cave was. Even though almost 100 rescuers worked frantically to get me out of Nutty Putty Cave, only one person could access me at a time. 19 hours into the rescue, my body was failing. Being upside down for so long was taking its toll. The human body isn't meant to handle this. My heart struggled to pump blood out of my brain against gravity, leading to a dangerous accumulation. Breathing became a struggle, and I went between moments of calm and sheer panic. A two-way radio was lowered down to me, allowing me to talk to my wife. Despite our fear, we did our best to comfort each other. Her voice was a lifeline in the darkness, giving me strength to endure the agony. Finally, the rescuers completed drilling and setting up pulleys to free me. As they began inching me out, the pain in my legs was unbearable, forcing frequent breaks. But slowly, I was lifted and hope flickered as I made eye contact with the rescuer. They looked tired, just like me, but despite the pain, we managed to smile at each other. Then, disaster struck. Just as I was nearly free, the entire team fell backwards. The rope went slack in their hands. I heard a crash and felt the rush of air as dust filled the tunnel. When it settled, the rescuer closest to me was unconscious, and I realized the pulley had broken free. I had slid back into the crevice, even deeper this time. The hope that had briefly flared up was crushed, leaving me in a darker, more desperate place than before. The pain was excruciating, but worse was the helplessness. I could hear the desperate efforts of the rescuers above me. One of them suffered severe facial injuries and had to be replaced. When the new rescuer arrived, he saw what I already knew: I was fading. My breaths were shallow, and each one felt like a battle. He tried everything, drilling a new hole for the pulley system, but exhaustion overtook him. Another rescuer took his place, and by then, I was barely holding on. I could hear the urgency in their voices, but couldn't muster the strength to respond. The shadows before my eyes kept on growing darker, until a point where I no longer could see or hear anything. In those final moments, I thought of my family, the dreams I had, and how this dark descent had taken everything from me.
Shortly after John lost consciousness, a medical professional crawled into the cave to where he was and pronounced him dead at midnight on November 25, 2009. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest. Despite the efforts of 137 rescuers who worked non-stop for 27 hours, they were unable to save John Jones from Nutty Putty Cave. The next day, authorities decided that retrieving the body would be too risky, and with his family's consent, they poured cement over the entrance, sealing the deadly place for good. John's body has been there ever since, making Nutty Putty Cave his final resting place.